Go, hit the door. Good afternoon. I'm Deb Yandala. I'm the CEO of the Conservancy for Cuyahoga Valley National Park. I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Jonathan Jarvis, Director of the National Park Service. There are 401 sites managed by the National Park Service. When most people think of our country's national parks, they think of the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, or one of the other sweeping landscapes across the country. The service is much more than that. Included in the Park Service system are museum artifacts, historic monuments, battlefields, and of course, our own wonderful Cuyahoga Valley National Park. The Park Service is responsible for protecting patrons at park sites and for conservation of park lands. There are many challenges facing the National Park System and the service that manages them. There is right now a $9.5 billion maintenance backlog and repairs across the system. This money is needed to maintain many of the sites where history was made in our country, such as Ellis Island and Independence Hall. Roads and bridges in disrepair make up half of the backlog. There are also external factors that threaten our parks. This includes physical development, real estate, large-scale farming and other industry, and wildlife population changes resulting from these external factors. Invasive species continue to crowd out native flora and fauna. The National Park System is also grappling with the effects of global climate change. According to a recent article in National Geographic, if the climate continues to change as predicted, Montana's Glacier National Park may not have any glaciers. Coastal parks may find themselves smaller. And with changes in temperature and precipitation, wildlife habitat is changing. These are not simple times for people involved in conservation and parks management. As the National Park System looks forward to its centennial in 2016, we are fortunate to have a talented, experienced leader to lead our parks into their second century. National Park Service Director John Jarvis is a native of Lexington, Virginia, and holds a BS in biology from the College of William and Mary. He has also spent time at Harvard University in the Kennedy School Executive Program. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a Cleveland welcome to National Park Service Director John Jarvis.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, for really inviting me to this great part of the world, to Northeast Ohio, to talk about the National Park Service. Marcy continues a tradition of great legislators from this part of the world, John Seiberling and Ralph Regula, and all of whom have been great supporters of the work of the National Park Service. And I want to thank the City Club of Cleveland for hosting me and inviting me here. It's really a great honor as well. And really, this city and this area has a great tradition of protecting its green spaces and parks. I want to recognize our new superintendent here, Greg Kinkle, who I've worked with many years, and I think he'll be a great addition to this community. And I also want to recognize a few other Park Service folks here, Shirley Williams, Superintendent James A. Garfield, and First Ladies, and Blanca Stransky, the Superintendent of Perry's Victory International Peace Memorial. And Deb Yolanda, the CEO for the Conservancy of Cuyahoga Valley National Park, really is the premier friends groups for this great national park that help us raise money and leverage our volunteers and run some extraordinary educational programs as well. Other friends in the room, Dan Rice and Tim Donovan for the Ohio and Erie Canalway National Heritage Area, this 110-mile district that extends from Cleveland's lakeshore in the north to New Philadelphia, really creating a connected landscape of history and culture and community and health and wellness. Just great work. And so you can see that there are great national park assets and programs here in Ohio. You know, the United States was the first to try this sort of great experiment, setting aside big places and pieces of natural America for all the people. But I believe that the parks are about much more than landscape and history. They are about who we are and what binds us together. In election years, we devote a great deal of attention to what divides this country. Blue state, red state, black, white, brown, Christian, Mormon, Muslim, Jew, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, rich and poor. I think the American people need a reminder of the core American values, and I believe that there is no better place than our national parks. I believe that there is even a responsibility of the National Park Service and our partners to step up to this societal obligation to help reacquaint our citizens with the values that unite us as a people. Let's start this little journey of mine with the seminal documents of our great country, the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The preamble to the Constitution: we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution. Ken Burns once said, "We have a little too much pluribus and not enough unum." I'd like to talk about the unum, about the values that bring us together as a nation rather than those that divide us, about those things that make us uniquely American, citizens of a nation that is viewed by the rest of the world as a symbol of freedom and justice. People save what they value, and since 1872, Americans have chosen to set aside 401 places as national parks because they represent our national character and they define the American experience. Becoming a national park is not easy. It requires either an act of Congress or a presidential proclamation, often after lengthy study, debate, and much public involvement. These places must be of the highest national significance, the ones that we as a people have chosen as the best of our natural landscapes, our most important historical events, and our common cultural heritage. They are a collective expression of who we are. And yes, by the way, the White House is a national park run by the National Park Service. Just the outside, not the inside. Today, I offer you my field guide to American values as found in the national parks. At our fundamental core, Americans value freedom, freedom from foreign rule, from tyranny, from taxation without representation. The place where we became a nation, where we declared our freedom 237 years ago, and where we wrote the Constitution, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, is a national park. But even with the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, freedom was not gained for all. It took a civil war nearly 100 years later and the loss of more than 600,000 lives to secure the freedom of enslaved Africans. This is a story that crisscrosses the national parks, from the Frederick Douglass home to Ford's Theater to the battlefields of Gettysburg and Manassas. Fundamental to that struggle to end slavery is the American value of equality. We see this in the national parks that commemorate the pursuit of civil rights, like the Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail, where, in the aftermath of a bloody, violent confrontation and peaceful protesters, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a 54-mile march that helped ensure the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We see it at Brown versus Board of Education in Kansas and Little Rock Central High in Arkansas, where we honor the fight to achieve equal access to education for all of our children. We see it at Women's Rights National Historic Park in Seneca Falls, New York, where 5 women organized the first women's rights convention in 1848 that declared all men and women are created equal and demanded equal rights, including the radical thought that women had the right to vote. These places are also symbols of a related value, democracy, a fundamental belief that each of us has a say in our government. Not many people know it, but the tangible roots of our government are in New York City, at 26 Wall Street, known as Federal Hall. This is where George Washington took the oath of office as our first president, and the first Congress, Supreme Court, and office of the executive branch. Federal Hall is a national park. Across the New York Harbor from Federal Hall is the most powerful and recognizable symbol of democracy and freedom in the world, the Statue of Liberty, and by her side, Ellis Island, both national parks. To live in a free democracy is a universal human desire. More than 12 million people from around the world, drawn here by the promise of a better life, passed through America's Golden Door from 1892 to 1954. Whether we agree about the policies and laws of current times, we are a nation of immigrants, and that has been one of our country's strengths. Over the last few years, in partnership with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, the National Park Service has invited new citizens to take their oath of citizenship in national parks. From the deck of the USS Constitution to the lawn of the James A. Garfield National Historic Site, where better than on the grounds of the home of a man who dedicated and gave his life to serve his country, to imbue new citizens with a sense of patriotism. And perhaps there is no more classic American value than our pioneering spirit, the readiness to take on the unknown. That spirit is alive at Homestead National Historic Park in Beatrice, Nebraska, where we tell the story of how more than 1.6 million people were given the opportunity to claim 270 million acres of land and live the American dream. It is also alive along the Lewis and Clark Trail at Fort Clatsop, the lonely Oregon outpost established by the explorers at the end of a 4,000-mile-long journey to discover a water route to the Pacific. Ingenuity is so much a part of the American value that it is often the word American goes before it. It is a hallmark of the American tradition, and we need to look no further than native Ohioan Thomas Alva Edison, who established his idea factory that generated 1,093 patents from the phonograph to the battery, which you can learn about at Edison National Historic Site in New Jersey. Or to Dayton Aviation, right here in Ohio, and Wright Brothers at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, two parks that tell the story not only of the Wright brothers' multiple failures, but their single-minded determination to reach the ultimate goal of human flight. America has a long tradition of hard work, no doubt one of our core values. Evidence of this is embedded in one of our newest national parks, Paterson Great Falls, where the pioneers of the textile industry harnessed the might of the New Jersey River, triggering an economic boom that set us on the path to become a world trade power. Nowhere is the American value of hard work more visible than Lowell National Historic Park in Massachusetts. At Lowell, you will see what it took to make a living in the 19th century, especially if you were a woman who toiled all day among the machines. After all that hard work, there is the core American value of fun. The Declaration of Independence stated that the pursuit of happiness was an unalienable right, and the National Park Service is required by law to provide for that happiness and enjoyment in our parks. And we are fairly sure we're the only federal agency with that mandate. So which national parks represent the core American value of fun? How about our own Cuyahoga Valley National Park, right here where you can hike and you can bike, watch wildlife, or just relax? Where else can you go to enjoy an evening concert in the music in the meadow, take a ride in the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad, or purchase locally grown fruits or vegetables right from a national park? Or Gateway National Recreation, which offers millions of residents of New York City a national park in their backyard where they can hit the beach, go birding, watch their kids play soccer. And though battered by Hurricane Sandy, Gateway is back and open for the enjoyment of all. For visitors who want to take fun to the extreme, where better than to test your mettle while clinging to a raft to the Colorado River it rushes through the Grand Canyon, or scaling the icy slopes of Mount Rainier or Denali on a bid for the summit. Americans have a long history of valuing courage and of defending our ideals and standing up for principles worth dying for. We see that in the somber field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at Flight 93 National Memorial, where we will forever remember the bravery of the 40 passengers and crew who gave their lives to prevent an attack on Washington on September 11th, 2001. We see it in the historical military cemeteries managed by the National Park Service, where more than 170,000 members of our armed forces are buried. At Antietam, Gettysburg, Yorktown, Fort McHenry, Shiloh, Manassas, you stand on ground christened with the blood of these brave Americans. Those who defended America on foreign shores are also remembered at the Vietnam, World War II, and Korean War memorials. National parks carry this responsibility of remembering. And for a glimpse of incredible courage and sacrifice, stand above the deck of the USS Arizona at Valor in the Pacific National Monument, where thousands died and others risked their lives to save the wounded from the wreckage of burning ships after the attack on Pearl Harbor. As our men and women in uniform remain engaged in warfare today, I believe our desire to honor their service is an American value that transcends all things that might divide us. And deep down, we hope for and reflect on peace. Perry's Victory and International Peace Memorial at Put-in-Bay, Ohio, is an example that long-standing international peace can be found among bordering nations. I personally believe that one of the most compelling American values is our honesty, to not hide the uncomfortable past, but to learn from it. As we commemorate the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, staff at more than 70 national parks that preserve the parts of this story are discussing not only troop movements and battles, but the 4 million enslaved Africans that were at the heart of the conflict. A century and a half ago, President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation took effect. Its promise of freedom was not fully delivered until 2 years later at war's end. That we value honesty is also clear at places like Manzanar in California and Minidoka in Idaho, 2 of the 10 internment camps where we, in the hysteria of the outbreak of World War II, more than 120,000 people of Japanese descent, many American citizens, were incarcerated for no other reason than their heritage. We have not concealed this history, and by preserving these places in the national park system, we have ensured that the story and the lessons we learned are never forgotten. One of my proudest moments as director came at the dedication of the Cesar Chavez National Monument in Keene, California. Chavez's family told me that after visiting Manzanar and seeing how the National Park Service unflinchingly tells the story of the Japanese internment camps, they were confident that we were the right people to preserve and share the history of the struggle of the farm workers' rights led by Cesar Chavez. Our nation's history with Native American peoples is fraught with war and bloodshed and discrimination, but the looting of the Anasazi sites and the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde galvanized a movement to protect the antiquities and I think spawned respect for cultural heritage of all kinds. This honesty is found in parks across the Southwest, in places like Chaco and Montezuma Castle, and in parks that honor contemporary relationships with Native people, including Hopewell Culture National Historic Park, protecting these sacred earthworks. Our young country has faced great crises. In those times of great challenge, leaders have emerged: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt. From the faces of Mount Rushmore to presidential childhood homes like William Howard Taft in Cincinnati, to the National Mall in D.C., America's value of leadership is found in our national parks. But to be sure, presidents are not the only leaders. Throughout the history of our country, the first ladies of this nation, sometimes behind the scenes and sometimes at the forefront, have truly helped shape this nation. Their stories and legacies are preserved at First Ladies National Historic Site here in Ohio. And in 2013, we dedicated the Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument in Xenia, Ohio. In spite of overt racism and stifling inequality, Colonel Young rose through the military ranks to become one of the most respected leaders of his time, including the first superintendent at Sequoia National Park. Regardless of your ethnicity, social status, or whether we are rich or poor, Americans appreciate the beauty of grand scenery, and our national parks provide the opportunity for everyone to experience that beauty. It's pretty hard not to feel a rush of patriotic pride when you stand at the rim of the Grand Canyon or in the alpenglow of the Grand Tetons. These are our American cathedrals. We as Americans have a strong bond with the land. We identify with it personally and consider it to be part of our national character. Americans understand early on that a gift of nature, and we took measures to safeguard that with a conservation movement unlike anything else in the world. It began with the writings of George Perkins Marsh, the conservation farming of Frederick Billings, and the philanthropy of Lawrence Rockefeller. This legacy is now on display at Marsh-Billings-Rockefeller National Historic Park in Vermont, where you can find out that actually it was the women that was actually doing all the work. One of the really unique things about American value of conservation is that those that had achieved the American dream wanted to give back to the people and preserve special places. And so was born the idea of conservation philanthropy, which started with the families such as the Rockefellers' gift to America of Acadia National Park and the Virgin Islands National Park. Go to these parks for their fun and sun, but learn the power of the gift of conservation. In my nearly 40 years with the Park Service, I've seen this core American value at work in our willingness to restrain ourselves from overwhelming special places with development, technology, and people. The manifestation of this value, the conservation ethic, can be seen in the establishment of landscape-scale national parks like Yellowstone and Everglades, the Canyonlands, Denali, and Death Valley. From agate fossil beds to Zion National Park, America's 401 national parks are a collective expression of who we are as a people. They are a mosaic of the things that we value most about ourselves, places where principles forged in the hottest fires are preserved so that future generations understand where we came from. While they define the values that unite us as a nation, they also serve as a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. The national parks are quintessentially American, but they speak to all humankind. I'm incredibly proud that the National Park Service has been entrusted not only with the care of these places, but with the responsibility of reminding Americans of the values that unite us as a nation. In 2016, the National Park Service will mark 100 years, not only in parks, but in thousands of communities across the country that we serve through programs that sustain local conservation, recreation, and historic preservation. But 2016 is much more than a milestone birthday. It is the start of a second century that inherently American conservation and preservation movement. In 2001, we launched a call to action, a blueprint for our future, and in it we set 40 strategic, tangible goals to meet the challenges of the coming century. The new century will see a fundamental shift from the last one. For 100 years, the emphasis was on bringing Americans, people, to the parks. Now we are preparing to take the parks to the people. With the National Park Foundation, we are developing a multi-channel public engagement campaign to elevate the visibility of the national parks and our partners, and to introduce the public to the work that we do to build relevancy, connection, and support. We need to invite a new multicultural generation to get to know these places. We want them to see themselves in the national parks. We want them to understand that the parks are their places, that they are important to their history, their lives, and their culture. We also want Americans to be aware of the critical work that we are doing in partnership with communities across the country. National Park Service programs like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance, heritage areas, and the historic preservation tax credits that leverage billions of dollars in private investment are across neighborhoods in every county in America, including Cleveland. We have great examples here with two heritage areas, one on the National Aviation Heritage Area, and the other we are actually in, if I'm correct, Dan, that we are inside the Ohio and Erie Canalway National Heritage Area. These leverage what I would say a meager federal investment into great partnerships that preserve history and communities. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, revenues derived from the leasing of outer continental shelf oil, is distributed around the nation, and in this area, $13.2 million in Cuyahoga County and $2.3 million to the city of Cleveland. LWCF has assisted Cleveland Metro Parks to create urban spaces that provide safe, high-quality outdoor recreation and education and conservation. Our RTCA program is working with communities to establish over 100 miles of water trail on the Cuyahoga River. The goal is to improve water quality, provide recreational opportunities, and stimulate economic development as well. A treasured asset, as I'm sure you know. And the National Park Service manages the Federal Historic Preservation Tax Incentive Program, which is a mouthful. Over the last 10 years, more than 138 historic tax credit projects representing over $876 million in private investment have been certified in Cleveland alone. They include places like the West Side Market, the Karamu House, Tremont Historic District, to just name a few. These are little-known facts, and the National Park Service is not well known that they are playing these roles in the community. The National Park Service Centennial is a moment to raise awareness, to invite connection, and to build support for preserving the places and the stories that define our country. We must rise to the challenges of a new century while continuing the best traditions of the previous one. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to interact with students and teachers from Clark Elementary School, a school near the west side of Cleveland. They're learning and experiencing key educational concepts, especially in STEM. And through firsthand learning, we could see the spark in their eyes. Because they're spending time in national parks with hands-on science, they learn not only about science and history, but about themselves. I believe the national parks and the values they represent are critical for the future of our democracy, for the future of our civil life as a nation, and for the future of the environment that sustains us. As the stewards of these singular places, the National Park Service can best ensure their future by strengthening the bonds between Americans and their national parks, to not only preserve these treasures, but to ensure that they remain relevant to every American. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are enjoying a Friday forum with John Jarvis, Director of the National Park Service. We will return to our speaker momentarily for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We encourage you to formulate questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome all of you here and those joining us through our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, 104.9 WCLV, and WVIZ PBS Idea Stream, or on one of the many other radio stations across the country that carry City Club programs. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Next Friday, April 18th, the City Club will host a panel discussion on biomimicry. For more information about our upcoming forums, to make a reservation or to order a CD or DVD of today's program, please refer to our website, www.cityclub.org. Today, we welcome guests at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler, Conservancy for Cuyahoga Valley National Park, Cleveland State University, Cuyahoga Valley National Park, Edible Cleveland, Friends of James A. Garfield National Historic Site, Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, and Ohio and Erie Canalway. Thank you all for your support. Today's program is sponsored by the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, the Conservancy for Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and Edible Cleveland. Thanks to all of you. Today's program is the Sadie and Maurice Friedman Memorial Forum, made possible by Robert M. Lustig and the late Howard R. Berger in memory of the Friedmans. Thank you. We welcome students to today's forum. Student participation is made possible by a generous gift from the Laub Foundation. Joining us today are students from Shaker Heights High School and Max Hayes High School. Will the students please stand and be recognized? Thank you for being here. Now we'd like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphones today are Program Director Carrie Miller and Marketing and Outreach Specialist Kirsten Pianka. First question, please.
Mr. Jarvis, we constantly hear that the parks have tremendous deferred maintenance and tremendous needs for particularly roads, bridges, trails. Is there any program currently that would encourage volunteers to join for like a 2-year period, like the old CCC, and perhaps as a reward for their efforts, secure forgiveness of college debts.
I like it. I think that's a great suggestion. Yes, first, the answer to the first part of your question, yes, we do have an enormous backlog. It's $11.2 billion. And let me just say that's a very good number. We've spent a lot of time understanding our assets. The National Park Service has, in terms of inventory of assets, that's buildings and roads, second only to the Department of Defense. And most of our stuff is historic. When you add that, there are presidential homes and the like. About half of our backlog is roads. So we have a very large road inventory, and it's our responsibility. So that's about $4.5 billion. For instance, the Memorial Bridge in Washington, D.C. happens to belong to us. We have a huge volunteer corps, 264,000 volunteers in the National Park System. So I think addressing the backlog is sort of multi-phase. One is we have a very strong budgetary request in the 15 budget to address the maintenance backlog, a 3-year, $1.2 billion request to address the backlog. The second piece is we have a challenge program to put up federal dollars to be matched with private dollars, and there are a lot of folks out there that are willing to match that kind of fund to do restoration on historic structures as well. And then volunteers. We do have what's called the 21st Century Conservation Service Corps, which is sort of the contemporary equivalent to the CCCs. My dad was in the CCCs, so I'm very familiar with the organization. You're never really going to be able to do the CCCs like they did back then, because now there's OSHA and NEPA and insurance and those guys, they just went out there and did it. I think today, though, we can create some sort of modern equivalent, and I think through the Public Land Corps there are opportunities for college loan forgiveness as well, so that there are models here that we can do, but we've never sort of comprehensively put it all together, and I think that's a great idea.
Jarvis, good afternoon. On behalf of the board members and partners along the Ohio Canalway, we want to thank you very much for your visionary leadership and steadfast support for national heritage areas, and particularly the Ohio Canalway. Your commitment and dedication to national heritage areas is unprecedented, and I'm very grateful to you for your leadership and personal friendship. Thanks. So thank you, Director. My question is how do national heritage areas assist the National Park Service in furthering the mission of the service, and what lessons can national heritage areas share that can be shared with other traditional National Park Service units?
Thanks, Dan. That's a great question. I think heritage areas, we're looking, the idea of national parks is an American idea. Some would say our best idea. And it has been exported around the world. And what's interesting is it went around the world and came back different. That in other places around the world, the idea of park has been probably most changed in that it recognized that people are still on the landscape and still active within those landscapes. And so, our original national park idea was imposed on landscapes of which the native people had already been removed. And so they were then unoccupied, though they had been occupied for thousands of years. The Heritage Area Program recognizes that people are in these spaces, and they've been there for generations, and they have deep core values around the history and the culture and the nature of those sites. And what heritage areas do is they leverage that and they empower that in a sort of very self-determined way, but create some overarching concepts of ideas of what ought to be preserved by engaging the public. And so frankly, it's a new model, and it's a very successful model. Not well-funded, but a very successful model, and you guys have been one of the pioneers. We're now up to 49 heritage areas in this country, mostly in the east. It's starting to catch on a little bit in the west. But I think there are great lessons about how you take a little bit of federal investment and you can leverage it multiple times into a community-driven, public engagement, active program of business, private sector, private landowners, NGOs, preservation, state, county, all of those things into something that takes the idea of national parks, that these places have a story to be told and a place to be preserved, and spread it with public support, rather than, you know, drawing a line on a map and saying we're going to protect everything in here and we don't know what's going on out there. This is a bigger model and a very good model, and I'm very supportive of it. So it needs to be better funded, though.
I wanted to ask one more question about the budget, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The National Park has been very effective spending the money it has. That it's been granted. The problem I'm seeing is the percentage of the budget that has gone to the national park. Even understanding with the war budget has not kept up. And what I'm curious about is, why is that, and what can we do about it?
Great question. And I didn't plant that. Absolutely, in real numbers and in buying power numbers, the National Park Service budget has been in decline for about a decade. And I would agree with you, we're a very efficient organization. You know, we often host other federal executives, and when they come in and they're basically aghast at how lean this organization is. I mean, people say we have large overhead. Well, that's just not true. The vast majority of our money goes directly out to parks. We're an operational agency, and it pays the bills, the utilities, it provides the rangers on the ground, and basically running a park, as I say, it's like running a small city in which the population turns over every other day. And we have all those responsibilities. I think that the reason it's been in decline is complex, and I think, frankly, it's a waning relevance to the American people. That if you look historically, the National Park Service has presented itself to the American people. We certainly did it post-World War II to connect to the returning veterans. That was what was called Mission 66. See the USA in your Chevrolet? Might ring a bell. That was a program of the National Park Service to get folks out. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars basically on infrastructure and basically built the system. And it is the system pretty much you see today in the national parks. We haven't done that since. And so one of my primary objectives as the director in coming up on the centennial is to rebuild that relationship with the American people, particularly with the next generation. I mean, we love our base. We have a very strong base, but that base is not very diverse. It tends to be the boomers. And so we need to build a relationship with the millennials, that they see themselves. And that, in my mind, will translate into the representatives that are in Washington. Unfortunately, there's the folks like Marcy are getting fewer and fewer in Washington that actually understand the value of these places and their willingness to say, this is a good thing, this is an investment, this is a great return to the community, this is patriotic, and the national parks are a place to exemplify that through their appropriations. And so that is absolutely one of my goals, and I need all of you to say that too, to your members of Congress and representatives, to say this is something that is truly worthy of and appropriate and important for an appropriator to invest in their little bit of money that they get, and then we will leverage it. And we have the hard economic data in terms of what we contribute. 2012, it was almost $30 billion to the American economy, 245,000 jobs in the American economy just from national parks, and $14.5 billion in communities within a radius around national park units. So we've got to make the economic argument, we've got to make the social argument, we've got to make the health argument, all of those in order to rebuild our budget.
Superintendent Jarvis, going away from the financial side, Cuyahoga Valley National Park, when you drive through it, there are areas that are marked as farm projects. And like on Route 303, there's like a farm project where the other day last spring, I saw a guy using a horse to plow his land. How are these incorporated into the national park for education or for production of vegetables, fruits, stuff like that?
I had the opportunity yesterday to visit one of those farms, probably the same one you're talking about, because they do have a matched pair of perchons to do their work on the farm, and I think it's fantastic, actually. Now, what's unique about Cuyahoga Valley National Park, it's actually in the legislation. It's in the establishment legislation that one of their responsibilities at this park is to preserve that history. And what I think is great, and John Debo and others here that deserve the great credit, is that instead of dressing up rangers as farmers and have them out there doing living history that we're actually farming. And we've got a new crop, no pun intended, of young farmers that are willing to go back to the land and utilize it with both a combination of traditional methods as well as contemporary methods. And what you have done, which is also fantastic, is you've created a market for those products that can make them economically viable. And this is sustainable, and it's sustainable agriculture, it's sustainable economics, and it has a ripple effect of benefits from healthy food, organic, management, historic scene, all of those things. So I applaud what you are all doing here with this. I'm not suggesting that we open up vineyards in Yosemite Valley, though. But I think where appropriate in an area that has had such a long history of agriculture, this is a perfectly appropriate thing at Cuyahoga.
I just wanted to know, are there any programs that maybe you guys could take us teenagers out to actually experience the parks?
Absolutely, and great question. We have a lot of programs. We have internships. We have a variety of youth corps, like the Student Conservation Association. Essentially, these sprung up as sort of replacements to the CCC. And they are specifically designed for teenagers. And I cannot say enough about what great experiences they can be to work in a national park, to gain that kind of experience and work as a team. And there are programs that you can follow multiple years and ultimately get your college tuition forgiven. We have programs that build to that as well. So I'll give you my card so you can I can follow up and hook you up with the right folks.
I was under the impression that the parks are becoming busier and busier, and somehow I get to the impression from what you're concerned about the public's acceptance of your mission. Am I incorrect about that? I mean, having experienced the parks really fairly late in life, I can't tell you what a great national treasure the parks are.
Great question. So visitation to the national parks is around 280 million, which is a lot. But if you look historically at the national park system, every decade it has grown. For the last decade, it's been basically flat. And it goes up and down with the value of the dollar, the gas prices, there's kind of a variable up and down. Some parks are growing, some parks are going down. But on average, it's been basically flat. And so that's one issue. The second issue, though, that I want to emphasize is that the visitation is a cross-section of only really one demographic in the United States. And other than international, and we get tens of millions of international visitors. So, I like to say if you go to Yosemite Valley in the summer and you stand at Yosemite Falls, the place is packed. You won't hear English, okay? That's great, but none of those Latinos are from the Central Valley. They're from Spain. And so if you thought of us as a business, and your primary client was, I'm a member of this cohort, an older white generation that aren't going to be around forever, then the business model is not sustainable. And we can't just say, build it and they'll come, because they're not. We know this with hard science, that they're not coming. And we're not sure why. We've got to figure that out. Part of the reason that you came is you were in the back seat of the car with your parents, right? And they brought you, right? With the windows rolled down and no air conditioning, and and you're in the station wagon, you're going to Yosemite. That's not happening with this next generation. And because for a variety of reasons, economics, new immigrants to the United States who had no knowledge of public lands, didn't even know these things existed because the country they came from didn't have them, or they were all privately owned. So they don't have a framework. One of the biggest trends going on in America right now is getting rid of your private vehicle. So I mean, the District of Columbia, I've heard in Cleveland, others, people don't own cars. So how do you get to, Hopewell Culture, or if you don't have a car, right? And so what we've got to do is figure out how to connect, because we want them to come. We want the public to come. Now, there's a chicken and egg thing here, because some parks are pretty much packed, but there's a lot of parks that don't get that much visitation, and that's part of it as well. Is we want to spread that out, and so that people recognize all 401 are parts of this system. They all deserve your love and attention, and visitation as well. So that's this is the first time we've sort of taken this on as a strategic effort, a true marketing effort to get the word out to come see us.
Thank you for mentioning your role in historic preservation tax credits. I might want to add one anecdotal piece of evidence to your comments. One is that about 75% of the people that live in downtown Cleveland live in buildings that wouldn't have happened without the historic preservation tax credit. The question I have, though, right now those credits are under attack in tax reform legislation. Are you allowed to advocate internally in the government to the beneficial aspects of the historic preservation tax credit?
I happen to enjoy a sort of unique status as what's called a PAS, a presidential appointee, and I can lobby. And I've been on the Hill with our partners that work with the tax credit program. I do say, though, the best voice are the developers. And we've been working with the folks involved in the historic preservation tax credit program to get the developers to come to Washington to help preserve that tax credit. For those of you who don't know much detail about it, the National Park Service works with developers where there's a historic structure. If they want to redevelop it for public use, they meet the Secretary's standards for historic preservation in concert with the state historic preservation officers, we can certify a 20% tax credit for that development. And in some cases, there's another tax credit at the state level also. And these are basically how these projects are economically viable. Otherwise, they just want to tear it down and start from scratch. And so it has been an incredible stimulus to community redevelopment, particularly in old downtowns where there's fantastic infrastructure and architecture that would otherwise be lost without this program. So yes, I'm actually on the Hill with those folks when they come to town to help preserve this.
Jarvis, we have 401 phenomenal national parks. What are we missing? What are the ones that, if you could wave a magic wand and have Congress or the president find a new park, where would you say that we're missing another opportunity to show our values through the national parks?
I think in general, the places that we're missing fall into the historic side. When we look at the inventory of historic sites, both those that are within the system, within the national park system, presidential homes, battlefields, places of deep value, there are definitely missing components. And so we've launched an initiative a multiple initiative to try to find those places, American Latinos, Asian American Pacific Islanders, African American, women, and LGBT. All of those have been launched in the last couple of years to identify sites that could be at least minimally National Register, National Historic Landmark, or potentially national parks. And so in this administration, we've added Fort Monroe, which is the beginning and the end of slavery in this country, Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad in Maryland, First State, which was the first, that was Delaware, the first state to ratify the Constitution, Charles Young, the commanding officer of the Buffalo Soldiers, and Cesar Chavez to recognize his contributions to the American Latino and the farm workers movement. There are more that we specifically are looking at. There's a Japanese American internment site in Hawaii called Honouliuli that no one knows existed, and it's an area that we're currently looking into as a potential new park. In terms of conservation, what I think the real value today is looking at not necessarily creating big national parks, but looking at the landscape and connectivity amongst all the land users. So heritage areas is one way to do that, but like in the West, looking at what does BLM have, what does the Forest Service have, what does Fish and Wildlife Service have, what are the state fish and games, what are the land trusts, and linking it together into some sort of sustainable ecosystem, keeping ranchers on ranch lands, helping them not have to convert to development and keeping them economically viable. I think that is the new model for large landscape conservation, particularly in the West, but it can also work here in the East.
What really got you interested in doing National Park Service?
Great question. I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. I lived on my uncle's farm, who had about 150 head of Black Angus, and I was a farm kid. And I loved the outdoors. Absolutely did not like being inside. But I also realized at some point that I was not really a very good farmer, and instead wanted to be a biologist. So I pursued a college education in biology, and really didn't know much about the Park Service, and wound up taking a trip out west and seeing some of these incredible landscapes, Yosemite and Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon and others, and came back and decided that was something worth pursuing as a career in the Park Service. I landed a seasonal job in Washington, D.C., at the Jefferson Memorial, not exactly Yellowstone. That was in 1976, and never looked back. Now 38 years with the service.
Thank you very much for coming to Cleveland and for informing us more about the parks and other facilities that you have under your jurisdiction. My question is, what assistance do you have, like, for example, an app for an iPhone or a smartphone? What assistance do you have for helping us and other people find these parks, especially as we travel, maybe a map or something like that? Thank you.
It's a great question, and I've heard a number of folks talk about how difficult it is often to find the information, to find the guidance and the ability. And sometimes you go to Google Maps to look at it, it's just a big green splotch. Nothing in there. I had a meeting a few months ago with the Google leadership, also with Facebook, to talk about better finding aids. What's interesting is that the Park Service is very rich in content. Those maps exist. Those photographs exist. That information exists, but it's just not pulled up. Now, I will tell you, we would be very bad at writing the apps. Government's not good at that. We are good at content. And so what we're basically doing is we're preparing our content to be brought up into these applications. And for instance, we worked with National Geographic and a few other organizations for the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech to develop an app for the National Mall. So it was not only a wayfinding, but it was also full of historic photographs of the actual event. You could put yourself in the event. You could actually, give the speech. There was all these different applications that could be used by bringing up this content. So, and I think that that's our most critical role. And as this next generation takes this on, they're going to want that information. I think all of you want that information to make it user-friendly.
Final question comes via Twitter. Emily Baca asks, our climate-friendly parks are great. What else is the National Park Service doing to lead the sustainability push in the United States, and how concerned are you about climate change?
Okay, well, there's a big question. And thank her for that question. I have said, I've talked a lot about relevancy, but I will say that climate change is going to be one of the largest challenges that we have in the national park system, that it is directly affecting our parks as we see them today. I mean, as Deb mentioned in her opening remarks, that glaciers will disappear from Glacier National Park. Fires are burning a month longer in the West than we've ever seen. Species are arriving in parks that we've never seen before because they're being driven by climate change, and other species are disappearing at the same time. And coastal infrastructure is being hammered by sea level rise and storm surge. All of those are impacting these incredible places. So what are we doing about it? So the Park Service has four sort of focus areas about climate change. The first is adaptation. We need to begin to adapt to climate change. We can't necessarily stop it, but we can do something about being prepared for it. So in a very simple terms, if we're managing a coastal environment, a seashore, and we're expecting a sea level rise, we go in and start thinking about what's the next salt marsh, what's the next wetland, what's the next area of bird habitat, and make sure that we're protecting that. Or if it's a cultural resource, we begin to document it because we may lose it as well. And I think the next one is mitigation, and that is that our own footprint. We could be carbon neutral and have like zero effect on climate change, but we can demonstrate to the American people sustainability. So we've set very high standards, LEED silver in all of our facilities, fuel, fleet, all of that. We have a very sustainable, and we talk about it, which is the third piece, is communication. As we talk about climate change, we're not afraid to talk about it, and we're also not afraid to demonstrate sustainability in everything that we do, in all of our operations. And the parks are, and particularly our facilities operations are on top of it. And the last is science, and we are the canary in the mine, and we are monitoring it so that we can alert the American people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Today at the City Club, we've been listening to a Friday forum featuring Jonathan Jarvis, Director of the National Park Service. Thank you, Director Jarvis. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.